If you carry on, I'll check.
Okay, we think we fixed it, but we're just going to do a check, so I'm going to carry on regardless. So we're going to come back to the minutes and I'll sign them as appropriate. Item 3, any declarations of interest? And confirmation, it appears to be working, which is brilliant. So no declaration of interest. We didn't receive any public questions within the relevant timescales. So that takes us to item 5, property and economic development portfolio holder update. Councillor Finan Cook.
Thank you, Chair. The property and economic development team currently consists of 17 members of staff, covering key areas including regeneration, economic development, the office and industrial portfolios, leisure and community properties, facilities and building management, and the retail and asset management. Key missions for the portfolio include delivering budgeted net income. The work of the Property and Economic Development Department overlaps various portfolios, which is why you will see various portfolio holders named in the annual plan section of your papers. Is my sound going?
If you carry on now, Cal, and see if that's better.
Yeah, I will present the full paper for the purposes of this meeting and answer your questions where I can. However, Councillor MacDonald is here this evening and will answer any specific questions relating to regeneration or transformation that arise in my paper. The Economic Development Officers have provided updates with regards to the Economic Development Strategy 2023 to 2028 within the paper, including an impressive list of businesses, employers and employers with whom key relationships have been formed. You will see figures relating to people supported by the workshop, which was relocated into Surrey Heath House in order to save costs. Happy to confirm that the DWP have now approved funding for the workshop to continue for another year. Following the publication of the Camberley Town Centre Vision 2024, an engagement exercise was carried out which surveyed over 500 people, and we look forward to analysing this data and publishing these results fairly soon. Key projects delivered by the team over the last year include the administration of the UK SPF, including full-scale replacement and rationalisation of litter bins across the borough, the upgrade of 4 play parks, public realm enhancements in Camberley Town Centre. Works commenced on the Pembroke Broadway public realm project, which also encompassed modernisation to increase safety in Arnold Walk in October of 2024 and are due for completion this month. The team have been working towards various regeneration projects, including the development of the London Road block. In this regard, we were successful in securing a grant of £1.4 million to fund demolition and asbestos removal in core areas of the site. Due to the recent LGR announcement, coupled with the significant cost of such a project, the decision was taken to discontinue exploring the option of redeveloping the House of Fraser building to create a new civic centre. We find ourselves in the same situation regarding the land east of Knoll Road, or to the layperson, the building we're all sat in this evening. We will no longer be pursuing the relocation of the council offices following the January Property and Economic Development Working Group, which, as you all know, is a cross-party working group. With regards to our property portfolio, you will see that the PPM for the theatre building is ongoing, and we have completed 2 key lettings since our last report. We are, however, exploring the possible sale of this building. The demand for office space in recent years has dramatically reduced, and this property isn't necessarily of value to the residents of Surrey Heath. Our industrial portfolio continues to perform very well, as you may remember from our previous press release to inform the public that we had achieved 100% occupancy. We currently have only 1 void in the portfolio, and it is outperforming the overall sector standard. The retail portfolio is performing slightly ahead of the national trend, with a vacancy rate of 4%, with the national average being 6.2%. It is worth noting that the vacancy rate is slightly distorted by some tenants who are not covering the costs and meanwhile uses which do not generate a positive rent. Our maintenance programme is in full swing with roof repairs, PV panels, replacement of fire safety systems, lighting upgrades and various smaller remedial repairs either in progress or due to commence very soon, giving some way to creating the safe, watertight town centre shopping experience that our residents have been begging for many years. We understand that town centres of the future will not be the town centres that we remember from the past, moving away from being retail focused and will gradually become hubs of leisure and recreation. With this in mind, we are actively working on expanding the mix of uses within the town centre, which will include a higher level of food and beverage and leisure offerings to attract visitors at all times, which will include creating a vibrant nighttime economy for our residents and our visitors. With regards to our leisure and community portfolio, there were a significant amount of leases which had not been renewed for an extremely long time. The team have been working extremely hard through all these issues, ensuring that appropriate lease renewals are put into place, which give the council a greater level of flexibility. Part of this piece of work has to been re-established solid working relationships with the valuable organisations who provide important services for our community. That's sort of my summary of the very large and well-written paper that you've got before you, and I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just one question I have before we start. Page 16 says annual plan 25-26. Your headings on the matrix are 24-25. Is that correct?
It should say in the text 24-25.
It should say in the text 24. Thank you very much. Hey, open to questions, ladies and gentlemen. Councillor Rowlands, then Councillor Wilson.
Chairman, do you want me to go through all of them at once, or just do it one at a time?
How many is all?
Sorry?
How many is all?
1, 4 or 5.
Do a couple, and then we'll move it around.
Okay.
Thank you.
Looking at page 17, again, this relates to accent. It appears that very much on this basis we're putting most of our eggs in one basket with accent. Is that actually the case? Are we tied into accent, or have we an opportunity to look at other housing associations and what they might have to offer? And are we convinced that we have to almost double our building rate? Are we convinced that Accent is the best housing authority that will enable us to succeed in that ambition? That's question one. I've heard what the fate of the House of Fraser building is. I just wonder whether we seem to be backing off, waiting for the two-year deadline of our existence. I just wonder whether we couldn't have a constructive idea of doing things in the meantime, rather than looking at that future and backing off and not doing anything. It's a shame, presumably, that the House of Fraser building is going to sit empty for this period. I can't understand what...
Do you want to leave it with those two for now, and we can come back to you? Is okay?
Councillor Rowlands, could you direct me to the actual number of the your query on the... You've given me page 17, but I've got a paper copy. Is it sort of 5 point something or other? Where is it you're looking in the paper with regards to accent?
3. It's point 3, is it? 3 in the list?
3?
Yeah.
And this is...
And that list of objectives on page 17 on my copy.
Okay, well, I mean, as you well know, Councillor Rowlands, Accent do own most of the social housing stock in the borough, so we do need to work closely with them. They aren't the only housing provider we work with, but we do need to maintain that solid relationship to ensure that the people that currently live in those homes are catered for adequately. So it's essential that we work closely with Accent. I don't know if we would consider it putting all our eggs in one basket. I think the eggs have been in that basket for a long time. We've inherited that and we have to work with what we've got. With regards to the House of Fraser, this isn't a decision that's been taken lightly. This is a decision that we've been talking through for 2 years in administration, and I'm certain that our predecessors had the same conversations. The fact of the matter is we would need to spend £4 million to remove the asbestos from that building before we could even think of doing anything at all with it. And we don't consider that is a good use of council finances at a time where every penny counts. So it's not something we're prepared to do at the moment, to explore a meanwhile use for a building that needs so much capital spending on it.
Just picking up on the point about social housing, unless I'm missing the point, I think what the question was is, if we're looking for new social housing, are we only going to work with Accent? I get that we've obviously got Accent for all our current social housing, but I think the question is, I mean, there's obviously other social housing developers out there. Are we considering those as well as Accent? I think that was the question.
Yeah, we do work with other social housing developers, and we don't rule anything out. We are, you know, we need to create homes for people, and we certainly have conversations with anyone that's prepared to do that in Surrey Heath.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. Page 23 says that the Economic Development Strategy was agreed by the Executive on 14th of March 2023. So obviously that's the previous administration, and I guess that's 2 years ago, and a lot has changed in the 2 years. So, and we've got the local government reorganisation imminent as well, and now we know more about the council's finances than we did 2 years ago. So I'm just wondering, is that strategy that was agreed then, is that still valid, or should it be more kind of thoroughly reviewed? Thank you.
The EDS is still valid. The core objectives are still relevant, but the delivery is intended to be flexible so we can account for any changes that might take place throughout the duration of that strategy. A lot of the work that's been undertaken within the strategy has been relatively low cost to Surrey Heath, and actually a lot of the work we can carry out by using existing schemes that have been, you know, currently being run by partners. So it's not too difficult and too costly for us at the moment to continue with that strategy.
Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, so Councillor O'Mahony, Councillor Nirmal Kang, and then I can go back to Councillor Rowland.
Going back to the report, page 19, London Road block. The comment about one of the last freeholds being in solicitors' hands, what exactly does that mean?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it all.
Yes, there are 6 properties within the London Road block that are not owned by the council, and the council's in the process of buying one of those, and solicitors are instructed.
So the other 5 are still going to stay as is that right?
Well, they're not currently owned by the council, and they're not in solicitors' hands. We're monitoring those.
Thank you. Councillor Nirmal Kang.
Page 25, 4.42. Just a little bit, if you could expand on accelerating high-speed digital conductivity. Now, you say work alongside Surrey County Council on that particular page on 25, and then on page 29, 4.47, I just wanted you to understand what the constraints might be in terms of getting this project sort of off the ground. What are the major issues that you're facing?
Councillor Kang, I'm going to ask Mr Breeden to run through this one with you.
Yeah, I think that project under the 3rd bullet on page 29, project number 2. Yeah. I think that is not going anywhere since the demise of Enterprise M3, but there are a number of other smaller projects going on that have probably meant that the requirement for that has abated.
My sort of concern was there any sort of particularly, maybe I'm wrong, sort of installation of 5G or were there any particular constraints or sort of fallout with the residents over this accelerated digital, or is that just to do with businesses?
I don't think there was any fallout for that. It was a project that would have needed a lot of investment from the private sector. The public sector was endeavouring to facilitate it where it could. But I'm not aware that there was any specific problems with residents or businesses.
Okay, so I'm going to go... Okay, I did say I'll go back to Councillor Rowlands for another couple. Then I've got Councillor MacDonald, I've got Councillor Wilson, Councillor Wheeler and Councillor Race. I've got to remember that now.
So, thanks, Chair. Going to page 23, on economic development. South West trains appear several times, and it always seems to me that the council has not developed a strategy that makes use of that line from right through Surrey Heath, right over to Aldershot. Perhaps the question could be, we could open up that issue again of using that and encouraging people to use that, because if you look at that naturally brings people into Camberley. It picks up people either side. That could increase the footfall in Camberley. And part of the deal might be that cheaper fares were offered to people using that link to actually use the town centre. But we haven't really seemed to have capitalised with South West Trains on that development. And of course the other argument is the environmental argument of getting people off the roads. On page 26, again a pat on the back for the business breakfast, which seem to be developing quite well. Real question is bringing some of the more recalcitrant employers into the fold and getting them to come on board as well. And possibly to invite perhaps more formal examples of effective business development in the area to get them to get that sort of information out as a positive exercise with the business breakfast. Page 27. This is something that I have talked about. We have a very small market every third week in Camberley, and we never seem to be able to expand that. I go to Farnborough, and there's always a buzz of activity in Farnborough with their market. I would just wonder whether that wouldn't be one way of increasing footfall and business activity in the town to try and revive the business market, our business market a little bit more. Thank you.
Councillor Rowlands, really we would only be in a position for our leader to write a letter. The train transport is not the remit of this council, so although it would be very nice to have different links, it's really not the remit of this council and we have no control over that. I didn't quite understand your question about business breakfast, so perhaps you could ask me that again, but I just want to go back to the markets. I know you and I have had this conversation several times, both inside and out of this chamber. The way these markets tend to work is the vendors move around and they do a different market every week. And there has been absolutely no desire from those vendors or from the operators to have that market on Park Street every week. It would also create issues in terms of road closures, events that the bid would like to put on. things just aren't the same as they would have been once upon a time where we had static markets. That's just not the way it works. But the markets that we do have are very, very popular when they do come. But as I said previously, the traders like to move around and do markets in different places, and we wouldn't have the trade there to hold a market every week. Perhaps you could come back to me on the business breakfast question, as I wasn't quite clear what you were asking me there.
A growing success, and it's a question of we've identified one or two recalcitrant larger firms who it would be nice to actually have them on board. And I suppose it's suggesting that we should try and get more of those firms from our business estates actively involved in it and continue to build on it.
Okay, yeah, our economic development team are working really hard to establish relationships with all businesses in Surrey Heath. So these relationships are maturing, and I'm sure that that's something that can be progressed by the team. They are working very hard to establish these links. So I'm sure that's not something that's too far in the future.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Owens. Councillor MacDonald. I'll tell you what, why don't we sort that one out? I'll tell you what, I'll go to Councillor Wilson, who was next on the list, and we'll fix yours up.
Thank you, Chair. It's page 26, about two-thirds of the way down. It says, work alongside business rate colleagues to support businesses through the increased rate charges coming the next financial year. And while I'm here, can I just put on record my thanks to the corporate accounting manager who spent a lot of time with me to explain business rates, and it's incredibly complicated, and I hope I understood it, and it made a big difference. So I think this is referring to the reduction in business rate relief to retail, hospitality and leisure that's coming at the end of this month, actually. The relief's changing from 75%, I think it's to about 40% or something. It doesn't mean this council's going to get any more money because the government cancels out its reliefs. But it does mean that all of these new businesses and businesses that we want to keep in Camberley Town Centre, the hospitality and leisure especially, are going to be paying higher business rates. So what effect is this likely to have? Are we going to see business failures, or are we going to see fewer businesses starting up because of that? Thank you.
Can I just, that was one of my questions, but can we add, because obviously the bid are really in, as well as you guys, but the bid are obviously in contact with a lot of those businesses. Are they getting any feedback as to the decrease in the discount and how that has actually affected the businesses?
Okay, the impact of business rate increases is unknown. However, many businesses are expecting to see an increase in their costs going forward, and unfortunately, the reality of that is that some businesses are likely to close as a result of this. We are engaging with many retail businesses, and rates and rent are often quoted as a significant issue for them. But we're all suffering increased costs in every sector and in our home lives. I would need to speak. We've got a new manager at the bid, as you know, so I would certainly need to have a conversation with Luke as to what he's hearing on the ground when he's speaking to people in the town centre and establishing those relationships. So I can certainly have a chat with him and find out what the core businesses in Camberley are saying to him.
Can I just throw something at the back of that? Because another part of that question was related to the NIC increase, because obviously they sort of go hand in hand, because obviously that is also going to have an effect. So if we can have that conversation as part of that conversation, would be quite helpful as well. Yeah,
we can do that. I mean, as I said, all businesses are experiencing increased costs, and it's just another thing that's that needs to be dealt with. It's a challenge that people need to overcome.
Okay, are we good to go?
We are. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you for having me, Chair. Just a couple of things to add from the conversation. I mean, from my side, one is obviously that we only retain 2.5% of these business rates, as worthy of note, in this forthcoming financial year. But the second thing I think goes back to Councillor Wilson and some other people's comments in terms of the economic strategy. The world has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. it has been mentioned, I think, that the LEPs have been broken up, which is these local enterprise partnerships, was it, I think? Yeah. And has been consumed into Surrey and Hampshire's duties. The other thing that maybe members are less aware of is that there was a letter came from the minister. I was frantically trying to find it, and I can't, which confirmed the devolution deal for Surrey, which pushed down some further activities into the Surrey domain to take leadership on, and one of those is around things like adult skills and supporting further economic development, and also the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. Funding for this year is held at the Surrey level, so there's a package of things that are still ongoing in the background there to try and support economic development.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wheeler, then I've got Councillor Raikes, and I've then got Councillor Nirmal-Kang, and then I've got Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Page 18, there's a reference to maintaining properties for the best use of the community. I just wonder if I could have a definition, please, of what constitutes true community benefit. Because I should imagine we all have slightly different interpretations of that. That's question number one. You mentioned earlier the sale of, or the possible sale of the theatre building. And I just wondered, please, whether or not it's to have, if we could have some clarification as to whether at the moment the theatre building is generating any revenue for the borough. And then my final question is a little bit abstract, and that is that the House of Fraser was occupied on the ground, and I think for a large part of it, the first floor, when presumably it was safe for shoppers and staff to be in there. And I just wondered what had changed to prevent the first floor or ground floor from no longer being safe to occupy, and have we explored any opportunity for that to potentially, for example, be used as temporary accommodation in the winter, or for some kind of alternative use? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Wheeler. True community benefit, I mean, that's a sort of, it means different things to different people, but we've obviously got lots of organisations which are doing some real good in various communities around Surrey Heath, and we're not looking to be selling properties from underneath them. We also have a lot of buildings which are incredibly underutilised by the organisations that are in them, and in a lot of cases people are saying that they don't feel the premises is any longer appropriate for what they're trying to do, or for the way that their organisation has shifted and moved and developed over the years. So we're not looking to rid the community of things that they find incredibly valuable. We are looking to generate capital receipts from buildings which are underused or unused, so we can keep the lights on, as I have said before. But please rest assured that we're not looking to rip things away from communities that are enjoying the benefits of things that they currently are. In terms of the theatre building, I think there's some pennies coming in, isn't there, Mr. Breeden? Mr. Breeden will be able to tell you exact numbers on that. But again, it's one of those things that we're looking at, and is that creating enough revenue for it to be of benefit to Surrey Heath, considering that it's an ageing building and we'll need some money spending on it in the future to keep it viable for tenants? That's what we're trying to weigh up at the moment. I'll let Mr. Breeden come in a minute, but with regards to the House of Fraser building, I take your point that it was occupied for a long time, and up until relatively recently, due to the fact that it was occupied, we didn't really know then what we know now. And we've had that building surveyed, and we now know that it would be incredibly unsafe for us to allow any members of the public in there without doing those essential remedial works in there in terms of removing the asbestos, and we're not prepared to pay for those works to be done for a meanwhile use that wouldn't pay itself back in sufficient time for us to warrant spending the money, basically. If I just pass over to Mr. Brigg and give some more details about the revenue at theatre.
Theatre is producing a positive income. There's one suite to let of 8,000 square feet out of around 60,000 square feet, which is occupied and paying rent and service charges.
Chair, if I may just come back then, I just express concern and surprise that we're looking to sell a property from our portfolio which is currently generating revenue at a point where we don't need necessarily do immediate repairs. So I just would like to express that. And I'd also like to ask a question, should we let shoppers and workers within the House of Fraser building up until the point that it was decommissioned know that, according to most recent research, then had their health was potentially at risk?
I think, well, I guess on the House of Fraser building, we've done our surveys once House of Fraser has vacated. One of the key issues is it's okay there. So I could walk in there tomorrow accompanied by the centre manager, perfectly fine. But what you can't do is disturb any of the materials in there, the ceiling tiles, or do any works in there. And as soon as you start doing that, then you're quickly into having to strip the whole thing out of asbestos, which comes back to the major cost investment that Councillor Finan-Cook referred to. So just walking around in there, doing an inspection, is fine. How House of Fraser got comfortable with that and the surveys they do, we don't have full information.
Did you want to speak on that?
I didn't on House of Fraser, I did on Theta. So the action is with the officers at the moment to look at the performance of that asset and to come back to us, because it's not quite as simple as looking at an average. It's also about looking at what the highest cost of money is that we're currently having to service. And I think Mrs. Radford communicated recently that there's a 6.05% interest rate in the market between the local authorities. So we had wisely gone out to market early to get our cash to see us through to the new financial year. But we have to look at our debt portfolio and we have to see how much money that building is generating versus our cost of money, which is not necessarily the average cost of money, because we'd be deleting it off the most expensive cost of money. So the action is still with the officers to do that. Also, as I think Kel mentioned, if we look ahead, there are some liabilities coming our way, so we need to look at the life cycle performance of the business. So whilst I appreciate, Councillor Wheeler, you may be concerned about a building generating money that we're potentially thinking of selling, it's not quite as simple as that, and we need to leave the officers to do the work and come back to us with the overall picture, not just for that asset, but the other significant commercial buildings that we hold and of the portfolio in general, because if we didn't have the portfolio, we wouldn't have such a large overhead that goes with it as well. So that's a piece of work that's outstanding, and we look forward to it coming back in due course for consideration.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I just wanted to come back on the House of Fraser question that you posed, Councillor Wheeler. It's no shock to anyone that House of Fraser has had asbestos in it since it was constructed. And under normal use and occupancy, there wasn't a risk. The fundamental challenge with House of Fraser is the fact that as soon as you start to make any alterations, you need to disturb that asbestos because it's there as a fireproofing, it's there as an insulative material, and therefore it's ubiquitous throughout the building. That's the fundamental challenge. So any meanwhile use would mean that we'd have to undertake alterations and therefore disturb asbestos, which is not just risky but costly. So just to reassure, whilst it was open, so long as that asbestos isn't disturbed, and we don't believe that it was, there wasn't a risk to the public or the employees there.
Thank you. So we have Councillor Rakes next.
Thank you. Just really following up on Councillor Kang's question about internet connectivity. The comments, and I just want to clarify, make sure that I understand things. This report talks about the high-speed digital connectivity and particularly backbones and broadband, the fixed internet, if you like. My understanding is there's absolutely nothing we can do to help residents with issues of 5G, that's just down to nagging operators or hoping that operators do something. Is that correct?
In a nutshell, Councillor Rakes, yeah, we can nag, and that would be about it.
Thank you.
Councillor Nurmal-Kang.
Thank you. Just page 34. Start-up business sessions. I mean, there seems to be a missing number, is it? Or just is it blank on that page 34, under start-up business sessions? First of all, and I'll follow the question.
Well, in the previous year it was 0, and in the subsequent year it was 2.
Okay, I just wanted to know. So there was, so during that year, October 23, 24, there's no sort of support. I mean, obviously the backbone is new businesses. I mean, what help is available? What sort of, how are we attracting new business startups?
Yeah, a lot of it is signposting businesses to the Business Surrey and the number of programs that are going on there and the programs that central government have. So that's a lot of the work of the economic development do. It's also about promoting the borough. So we've got promotional documents such as the Vision for Camberley document and the data that we put together as part of that. And then it's in being a point of contact for inbound calls. But we don't have a specific budget for, if you like, pump priming things or something like that. The economic development team is a team of 2 individuals plus a budget of circa £10,000. So
Okay.
it's about facilitating, directing people, putting people together with others. That's a lot of the work in terms of generating startups.
Okay, thank you for clarification.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to dig in a bit deeper into page 25, so 442. It's not football, it's broadband. So I just wanted to check and work out in my little brain, because I only got a little brain, I'm afraid. Is this part of lot 22? What we're referring to here in terms of where you're talking about Project Gigabit in Surrey Heath?
Is it part of what, Councillor Lee? You're using technical terminology that I don't understand there.
Lot 22, my understanding it's part of the bid process that you're referring to here for the delivery phase. I just wanted to establish if it was that first before I proceed to my next questions, Mr. Breeden.
Sorry, what is lot 22?
Lot 22, as I understand it, is the bid within Surrey for the funding to deliver Project Gigabit that's referred to as bullet point 3, next steps and timelines.
Sorry, I'm on page 25.
Yeah, so page 25, next steps and timelines, bullet point 3. So what I wanted to look into was the white category properties. So those are the ones that are not expected to have something delivered in 3 years, and understand if there's been any movement on that and where we're looking to that in terms of the broadband delivery piece. Also, I think it's quite interesting looking at the stats of the universal service obligation, which I think is probably quite critical when we're talking about acceleration of high-speed digital connectivity. So the USO is, I think, 10 megabits, if I remember rightly. And we've still got nearly 1% of properties that don't appear to reach the absolute basic. So it's just interesting to get your comments and narrative on how that weaves into this piece, because they're the real have-nots within our community.
I think our role in this is trying to unblock things for Surrey County Council. We're not the leaders of this process. or indeed the drivers of it. We're trying to unblock things and help where we can with connecting up with businesses and so forth.
So you're seeing the blocker at the county level for driving this forward?
No.
What are you trying to unblock, just out of interest? Because I look here at the full fibre, again, another item with below national average. So I noticed there were questions in the House of Commons, I think would have been October, November time, from the MP for Farnham and Borden on it. And I just wondered if you see specific blocks that could perhaps be helped by that. What sort of blocks do you see at the moment for this?
So I think that'll be a question for Surrey County Council, who are driving the process.
Okay, so this item is more related to Surrey County Council rather than Surrey Heath Borough Council. I'm not sure, because I think Councillor Kang and I think Councillor Rakes asked some questions on it. If this is more geared towards Surrey County Council, that's fine. I can direct my questions there. It's just appeared on a Borough Council agenda.
That's right. Our work has been assisting and helping where we can, and where there are issues to help or where we can connect people up with locally. That's what the economic development team have been doing.
Perhaps you can give some details on that, then. That's perhaps a more helpful question. Okay. Happy to hear that update now.
I can go back to my colleagues who've been working on it and give you more information if you'd like that.
I've got 3 questions, and then we'll close this section off because no one else had their hand up, and then we can go on to the next thing. So, sorry? Okay, I'll ask my questions first. So mine, now, I've not made a page number note, which is really bad, and I'm going to slap myself on the wrist in a minute. One of them relates to UK Prosperity Fund, and you must get sick of me asking this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. It's reference to the playgrounds, or the parks. Are they all going to be finished by March? I'm getting a nod from over there, that's fine, because I know that they have to be spent, and we obviously want the parks to be better. That's good, so that's a positive. Now, this is the bit where I'm struggling, because I've got 4.3 written down here, and I can't find the question I'm about to ask on 4.3. So I'm going to ask it anyway. I think it's economic development strategy. It says that we are doing actions to advance employment prospects for disadvantaged residents and those living in the boroughs and most remote locations. What are we doing to do that in those locations?
Well, obviously, we've got the workshop, which is available for all people to come and utilise. As I said to you in the opening speech I gave, we've just received funding for another year to continue that, so that is accessible for people under 25s, and the reach of that has actually been really rather good. I think you can see the numbers in one of the pages there. You can see how many people we've assisted there.
I know the numbers have gone down since it moved into Surrey Heath House, but it's DWP signposting, isn't it, that would get them in anyway, is that right?
Yes, we are also down 1 member of staff, but we are exceeding targets set to us. So it is outperforming what we should be doing there.
Okay, cool. And I'm going to ask this question because I saw it and I thought, now this is the bit I really can't figure out where I saw it. It says establish relationship with local education and skills providers, including, and I noted it said Collingwood on the list. And I should have declared an interest because I'm a governor. I was interested to see that. I'd like to know how we've engaged with local establishments like Collingwood on as far as local education, skills, etc.
I think we're really best if I linked you up with my colleagues who've been doing that work specifically. So 4.5, it refers to the NHS Anchor Institution programme, and my colleagues doing the workshop work as well would have had those contacts.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Okay, how many more have you got? Okay, I'll give you one. Pick which one you want.
You're a mean devil.
You've had 5, that will be 5.
it was following on from that question about training. On page 31, you talk about review existing skills coordination, Surrey Heath Workforce Development Plan. Can you actually itemise how this is happening? Because obviously it's generally regarded that our adult education provision here is of a lesser standard possibly than it is you might find in other parts of the county. It doesn't appear to be a strong forte with our Adult Education Institute. So where is the adult education training taking place that merits of saying that it's ongoing? It's certainly, I'd be interested to hear about it because I didn't know that it was going on in any effective way. And just to make a point about a success, page 34, the job fair really was quite successful with a lot of employers and people attending. So, and I think the feature was it was really well advertised, and the response was very positive.
Thank you for that. I'll make sure that the team who works hard putting that programme together and Careers Fair are cited on your congratulations. I appreciate that. And also there were a number of exhibitors who were working with individuals, perhaps the hard-to-reach individuals, and were specifically focused on them. So I think you've seen there was a lot of help and support to those people with those needs. In terms of adult education, a big part of the work at section 4.5 of the NHS Anchor Institution programme is about getting perhaps people who are perhaps trickier to get back into work for one reason or another, been out of work for some time, to get them onto training programmes so that they're ready to go back into the workplace. So that's one of the examples of, and one of the main direct pieces of work that this council's doing in the area that you just referred to.
Thank you. I didn't say it, but I had it written down. I'd also like to congratulate the team on Careers Fair. I was there at 9:30 when it started, and there was already a buzz then. There was a lot of people there. I know a couple of people that were there as trying to look for people, and they were speaking quite highly of it as well, so certainly pass on my thanks as well. Okay, thank you to you and the team. We're going to discuss the work programme, and I'll come back. If you don't need to be here for the next items, you are more than welcome to go, unless you really want to stay for the rest of the evening, but I promise it won't be on for 5 hours. Okay, before we go on to the work programme, I think we've got an answer for reference the finance.
Ms. Radford.
Ms. Radford.
Yes, sorry, I wanted to triple check before I gave an answer. And I think I recall it coming up at the committee meeting, actually. So, yes, the recommendation figure of 7.1 million is incorrect. It should be 21.8 million, which was the detail in the report. So it was the recommendation figure that was incorrect.
Okay, thank you. Well spotted, and I won't sign the minutes, and we'll get them reprinted. Yeah. Okay, thank you. You need to change your name on your it's Vicky, because I'm trying to read your surname, but it's Radford now, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, it's getting changed over tomorrow.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay, so next item is the work programme. Sorry.
Just on the minutes, I think that 7.1 appears twice. I think. Yeah, okay, that's okay, as long as it's corrected in both.
Thank you. So we've only got one more meeting in this year, and that meeting is currently include the executive portfolio, net zero, environment and leisure, and car parking. Has anyone got any comments on those two items? Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I noticed that the transformation programme, it says it will be coming back to that meeting as well. It says it on page 54, about halfway down.
Okay.
2.20, second bullet point.
Yeah, Mr. Stevens is going to clarify that point.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. You're absolutely right. We would, well, let's see how this evening goes, but we would like to come back in May to provide an update on the transformation programme and the next sequence of work that we'll be doing. So, provided there's space, Chair, on the work programme for May, that's what we'd like to focus on.
I would think that would be a really good idea, considering how significant it is.
Okay, that's fine. So it's interesting, this one-item meeting has now turned into a three-item meeting. And you're trying to add more to my schedule. We're certainly not going to take parking off. Okay, fine. So has anyone else got any other comments on the work programme? Brilliant. Okay. Sorry. That takes us to the next item, which is the transformation paper. Now, you will note that some of the papers, which, if you've got a printed copy, are in yellow, and obviously on the agenda will be what I would class as part 2, okay? You can't discuss that in a main meeting. If you do wish to discuss that, please make us aware, and then we'll go into part 2 at the end, and we can discuss those points, okay? Yes, Councillor Lee.
I don't have the yellow printed sheets. How do I get them? I don't think Councillor Kang has either.
No.
There's some behind. We'll get you there. So, as I say, if there are any points that you want to discuss from that, we need to go into to part 2s, okay? But that being said, I believe, who's presenting? Mr. Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. In a similar vein to Councillor Fine and Cook, I do want to congratulate the author and the team for a large and well-written report, so thank you, Ms Bainbridge. I appreciate this has taken an extensive amount of effort. So, just to summarise, over recent years we've been quite effective at delivering efficiencies through what was previously called the base budget review, which found £2.1 million of efficiencies, actually without very little impact on service delivery. Unfortunately, those efficiencies were quickly consumed by inflationary pressures and other increases in the cost of service delivery, so we found ourselves very much in a standstill position. Noting there was still a budget gap that needed to be resolved to reduce our reliance on reserves, the transformation programme was first developed roughly a year ago and formed part of this current year's annual plan, and also it continues into next year and the year beyond as well. You'll see from the report in 1.4 that the programme's got 6 key work streams. And during the early discovery phases, those have actually been reduced down and we're now focusing on 3 core areas. But fundamentally what we were trying to do was trying to bridge a gap within the medium-term financial strategy. So you'll see that the aspiration there was to try and bridge around £1.64 million of savings. Excuse me. And this was at, £1.85 million worth of savings. And this was at a point where the budget gap within the MTFS was around £2.6 million. Now, late last year, you'll appreciate that it became apparent that financial gap is significantly larger than that. And as a consequence, we find ourselves with a greater challenge than we first thought. And clearly, we need to work to a tighter timescale than the 3 years that was initially set out within the transformation programme. We're at a point where the MTFS projects that the remaining reserves will be depleted by the start of the 28-29 financial year. And that's also taken into account the savings that we've identified and that are baked into the budget through the transformation programme of £1.64 million. So they're already cooked into those financial assumptions. And that is on the basis that we have a standstill position. So there are no further financial pressures imposed on us as a council. As you'll see in the report, there are some additional elements that we need to consider. We don't quite know what the cost of local government reorganisation will be for Surrey Heath. And that's why I'm quite clear that clearly the paper in front of you talks about a standstill position. It doesn't talk about any fundamental shifts in our expenditure, but we are mindful that there could be some along the way. Just to give you an indication, if we were to try and balance the cost of service against income, depending on how we apportioned the interest, that would mean that we would need to find a further £2 or £3 million worth of savings to be able to bridge that gap. And clearly, it's not achievable for us to bridge the full £8 million gap that we see in front of us within the MTFS. I referenced earlier on that we've thinned down the work streams from 6, and we've identified 3 priority streams. Those are discretionary services, organisational design, and council and community land and property. They've been designated as priority work streams because they're the areas where we feel we can have the best financial impact and find the most savings. And the other 3 work streams within the transformation programme, whilst they are now a lower priority, we acknowledge that they are important in terms of facilitating some of the work that we need to do next. I'm grateful to the team so far. The discretionary services work stream in isolation has found close to £1 million worth of savings, which is not insignificant given the round of savings and efficiencies we've already found through base budget review, which, whilst not classified as low-hanging fruit, were relatively easy in comparison to what we're now having to do. I'm also grateful to the teams within the corporate management team, the wider management team, organisational design, our finance, HR and property colleagues, because there's been a huge amount of work that's gone into this programme, and only a small element of that is expressed within this paper. The last people to give note to really are the staff who have put forward ideas in relation to transformation. This is quite an unnerving time for local authorities up and down the country. We have financial challenges and we have local government reorganisation looming as well. So you can imagine there's a significant level of anxiety. But despite that, the staff in Surrey Heath have been fantastic in terms of coming forward with a positive and pragmatic approach to this and coming forward with ideas wherever they possibly can to make us as efficient as possible. So my thanks goes to all those staff. The Chair referenced the confidential annexes, so if there are anything that you wish to discuss in those, clearly we can go into closed session. But I'm happy to take any questions that you may
have. Councillor MacDonald, did you want to say anything on this? Okay.
No, happy to take any questions, Chair, but I wasn't planning to.
Cool, that's fine.
I think you've all heard my voice enough at various meetings.
Quite true. Okay, so with that said, before we start, I like to echo everything he just said because it means I haven't got to say it again. So, because I always end up forgetting to thank everybody for all the papers because these things don't just suddenly happen. So, thank you to you all. Right, open the floor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's possible later on, I could ask a question in part 2, but I'll do that obviously later. As has been said, this is obviously an enormous amount of work, and it's more than just savings. It's transforming what the council is going to be doing over the next few years, and I think this paper is probably the tip of the iceberg of the project. But I think it says it in the paper a few times, but it's obviously really difficult to predict what the savings and the capital receipts and so on are actually going to be over the next couple of years. It could easily underachieve or overachieve what's been required, and I don't think the council's ever done anything like this before that, well, I could imagine. Have other councils done it, or have any of the officers done this at previous councils, and what can we learn from that? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So whenever we're looking at savings, we have to take into account the risk that those savings aren't going to be realised, and routinely myself and the transformation team are looking at identified savings that have already been identified, such as those through the discretionary services work stream, and ensuring that we're on track, ensuring that those savings can be realised in full. And if that isn't the case, then clearly there's a need to reassess where else we can find those efficiencies to balance this out. So really, whilst we have individual work streams and each of those has a target, we're looking at a global savings figure here, and we have to accept there needs to be a bit of a buffer there. We're always apprehensive because a lot of the organisational design pieces around effectively deleting posts out of the organisation to make financial efficiencies. We don't want to do that unless we absolutely have to. So we do take a sensitive balance here, but we do appreciate that the deliverability on some of these is reliant on external factors, and as a consequence we try and make sure there is a buffer or a comfort blanket there financially.
Councillor Wilson, you're the only one to put your hand up so far.
Sorry, if it's okay, I'll just come back with a supplementary to that. So page 58, 8.1, and it's mentioned elsewhere that it says that the savings, if that's all achieved, and the transformation programme would not be enough, and other options, it says, have to be considered. And I think you mentioned earlier that it's not achievable to bridge the whole 8 million gap, obviously. So what other options are there? Can Can you expand just a bit more on that?
I'm happy to bring Mrs. Radford in at this point. I think the worst case scenario is the decisions get taken out of our hands and where we're forced to consider things such as a Section 114 notice, where ultimately we wouldn't be able to control the decisions that are made in the same way we can now. And that's something that we are acutely aware of. We want to make sure that the decisions that are made now are the right ones for Surrey Heath as a council and as a borough. And I think if we ended up going down the 114 territory, clearly those decisions are entirely taken out of our hands. So whilst this is painful and distressing for us, for service users as well, it is something that we very firmly feel that we need to control. Happy to hand over to Ms. Radford.
I've just sent her a message, but go on. Ms. Radford, did you want to say something? Or Mrs. Radford?
Yeah, just to confirm what's just been said, really. If we issue a 114, the first thing we would do is contact the government, and there'd be various processes to go through to try and avoid hitting the 114 at that point in time. When we do issue, or if we issued a 114, we'd get commissioners in. Not only is that very costly for us, that we then have to, we have to fund, it does take a lot of the control away. So ultimately, the commissioners make the decisions, and it is also a lot of work on the officers, which is why we're really pushing quite hard on the transformation now, and really seeing how far we can test the way we deliver services to avoid going into that position at the moment. So obviously, if we get to the stage where we need to, then obviously we will need to. But we want to try and do as much as we possibly can while we have control over what we can do at this stage.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to come back on Councillor Wilson's question because I didn't answer it completely. You asked about the experience of officers in relation to transformation programmes or organisational design, and also about other local authorities. So through the Chief Finance Officer group, which Mr. Watson and Ms. Radford attend, there's obviously lots of dialogue around efficiencies and how those are processed. We also look to our immediate neighbours such as Woking, Runnymede, Mole Valley. Mole Valley are currently going through a transformation programme which is similar to ours, and we take learnings from those and we share advice and expertise as to how these things are working. As far as the officer experience goes, it varies, but we all have first-hand experience of having to do organisational change, transformation and delivery of efficiencies as well.
Councillor MacDonald, you wanted to speak on that?
Yeah, that's okay. Thanks, Chair. Couple of things. I mean, your original question, Councillor Wilson, you touched on, you started your question by talking about land and property sales and income coming from those. I think, as Mr. Breeden would note, a very prudent approach was taken to that in terms of the timing, but also the probability of anything happening as well. So anything we have in the budgets today is quite prudent. I think a similar approach actually was taken with respect to inflows of cash from SIL and Section 106 as well, that we do have a forecast, but again, it was quite prudent in terms of time and value. But there is an expectation that we will get some of that as well, which potentially is a small upside. Just linking to what Mrs. Radford said, the budget that we passed not that long ago, I'm sure everybody remembers that evening, the forecast basically says we should end up with a small gap in the end of year 3, excluding this year, the end of year 2. And we would hope to continue to look for opportunities to improve the efficiency and balance that with service delivery to close that gap further, but we would get a bit of time to do that. And at that point, we would be out of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Mrs. Radford, specific earmarked usable reserves at that point in time. However, our first stage, before we get to the section notice that was mentioned, is to approach the government to access our other reserves, which we have. And the likelihood is that the government would give us access to those reserves, and some of those include things, SANG-related reserves from memory, which we have a substantial amount of, which should see us through another year, and then potentially we end up in the situation that Mrs. Radford said. But we need to be very careful because these commissioners won't come cheap, as was said, and will chew up an awful lot of time. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy there. But also, if we do end up with special measures, as we've seen with Woking, you don't get relief from the debt. You just get to take on more debt to pay the debt you already have. So it's like a payday loan. It doesn't really help you in the long run. So that's just the final piece. And I think we should, as always honest and transparent with the residents. If we end up in that kind of situation and near that point, then we would be looking at breaking the threshold for council tax increases as well, as you will have seen with many other councils that have come under pressure.
Questions? Councillor Rowlands.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this comes within PERDA or not. There's a reference here on page 50 to staff morale. Is it relevant to raise a question on that?
If you didn't, I was going to, so, because it's a question I've got written down. We're not going into figures, so I would suspect that there's not a problem with that.
Okay, well, obviously, we know the level of the staff. The staff have been awarded as pay settlement, which is well below the rate of inflation. And inflationary pressures seem to be piling on each other. How do we see this process in relation to that, in keeping and encouraging our staff in that way? And if I could ask, while I've got the floor, just ask another question on page 51. The suggestion is there are alternative sources of income which can be identified in some of the council's activity vis-à-vis the county council and other sources. Has that been taken into account for some of the things that the council does?
Can I just tag on to the back of the first question? Obviously, there's been some surveys completed. What sort of feedback are you getting from staff on the surveys that have been completed?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Rowlands. So, in terms of staff morale, the pay settlement isn't ideal. What we've tried to do with our staff is be as open and transparent as we possibly can. We work on the ethos that the staff should know first. So prior to this report being published, we made sure that there was a heads up, if you like. We have an intranet, so we posted on there to make them aware that this meeting was coming forward, and there was a report, and we shared the link to the report. Wherever possible, we ensure that where we are making a decision or where you are making a decision as councillors, that the staff are aware of that well in advance of it going in the public domain. So transparency is really important to us. You are right, everything is costing more. The cost of living is dramatically going up, and that does make it a struggle for a lot of people. And the pay rise, whilst not ideal, was all that we could actually afford at the moment. And we desperately need to get to a point where we can balance the budget to an extent where we can afford to give recognition to the staff, an appropriate level of recognition. And at the moment, simply, we just aren't there. We can't afford to do it. As we start to go through the transformation programme, we sincerely hope we'll be in a position where we can give the staff that are here with us at Surrey Heath the recognition they deserve. In terms of the survey, we haven't actually launched our staff survey for this year yet, and we do anticipate that there are going to be a lot of concerns expressed around transformation, local government reorganisation. But we also hope there'll be some positives in there, because we have tried to be as open and upfront with staff as we possibly can. In every way that we conceivably can, and we're always here to take feedback from staff as to how we could do things better. In relation to income, Councillor Rowlands, we are looking at every single available opportunity for income. Through the service delivery review, we're asking services to see what reductions they can find in their revenue expenditure, up to a level of 20%, but we're also looking for income generation opportunities, whether that be invest to save. And there are wonderful ideas coming forward from staff as to how we can do that. So not everything we are looking at is doom and gloom. Actually, there's some real positives coming out of service delivery review. Things like invest to save, where if we put more staff in, where less reliant on external resource or external agency or consultants. So there are some really good ideas coming forward that are far more positive than we would have hoped, and that's really a credit to our staff.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Wilson and then Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question on the service delivery reviews. This seems to be a separate path from the 6 work streams in the transformation programme. So I just wanted to check that I understood that the service delivery reviews are targeted to find £500,000 of savings, annual savings, in the next financial year, but then there's no increase in the savings after that. These savings just stay the same year over year. And first of all, is that correct? Have I understood that correctly? And also, how will progress towards this be monitored? Because we've seen how progress towards the 6 work streams are monitored, but I might have missed it. How will progress towards the service delivery review target be monitored? Thank you.
Yes, that is me, and unless Ms Bainbridge wishes to answer that question, that's most definitely me. Service delivery review comes under the organisational design work stream. So in reality, this started as what we phrased as gold to silver, but we didn't feel that that really gave it a fair description. In essence, what we're looking to do is look at where there is unnecessary effort, or where if there was a reduction in resource, certain areas that are largely discretionary or entirely discretionary that we could no longer do with limited detriment. And that's what service delivery review looks at. So if we had less resource available, what was it that we would not do that's on the list of current services that we provide? And there are a number of examples that I'm sure we can provide if you like, Councillor Wilson.
No, that's great. I know that some of it's covered in part 2, and yeah, I mean, I think that answers my question. So it's all these are going to be identified in the first year, and there's no future reduction after that.
This is a very fluid situation. So, as I've said earlier on, we think we can make certain savings out of discretionary services, but if they don't come to fruition, we'll need to look for more efficiencies elsewhere. It could very well be that organisational design generates more savings than we anticipate, which, if we can do that in a way that has limited detriment, then that's wonderful. There's also the fluidity around the cost of service and our budgets and other pressures that we experience as we go through this transformation programme. So it's not straightforward for us to be able to say, yes, we stop after year 1, and therefore once we've made those savings, they continue through the next financial years. We think there will be some fluctuations and variations there that we'll have to account for, and we possibly could have to find more efficiencies for as well.
Yeah, thanks. And that goes back to my first point about it being difficult to predict with any accuracy how you're going to achieve all this. Just a final supplementary on the organisational design work stream. So on page 54, and you just mentioned it a minute or two ago about a review of the agency and consultant costs. Where are they mostly found in the council's work? Is it in one sort of area, or is it spread across lots of different areas? Thank you.
It's largely spread across the organisation, but I'll give you 3 examples. Building control being one, where there is a national shortage of building control surveyors, and that means that we are reliant on agency resource to be able to fill some of the roles there. Within the legal services team, because of the change of staff we've had, we have had to bring in additional legal resource to support there. And I'm just trying to think of the third one, unless anyone else wants to interject. Sorry, Councillor Wilson, it's completely gone, but I will come back to it.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got a couple of observations and some questions. And the first one is Nick. Obviously, you're leading the organisation at the moment at what can only be described as one of the toughest possible times. And I think a massive thank you from everyone elected to represent people on this council. It's one of the toughest. I think it's one of the toughest gigs in local government. I can't think of many that are tougher. So thank you for all you're doing leading the ship, and thank you to the amazing team behind you, who I know it's tough when you're in an organisation with a lot of change, and there's a huge amount of uncertainty. I guess in some respects that can be counterbalanced with potential opportunities with the unitaries in the future. And my understanding is those TUPE rights follow through to unitaries. So whilst the reshaping is difficult, there is potentially in 2 years' time some positive light at the end of the tunnel. That leads me on to page 53. So there's a graph there. I love graphs. It makes things a bit more visual. It helps tell a story. I see there's positions and FTE there. Should I be seeing headcount, or have I misread that particular graph?
I can answer this one. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yes, it was something I flagged because I looked at the legend and thought exactly the same thing. Where is the headcount? Headcount mirrors the positions, so the upper green line. And if you look to the right of the chart, you'll see that there are figures 296 and 292, where you don't just see a square, you almost see the peak of a triangle as well. And that's where we think there's a slight anomaly between the headcount figure and the position figure. They should align consistently throughout, but there they don't. So effectively, those two lines just mirror themselves.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that. I notice if we pan from Jan 2022 through to Jan 25, the head count is the same after ups and downs. I assume some of those ups will have been the investment in the finance team to do various things to give us a clear picture there. I wanted to turn to 114 notices, or rather the process prior to that next. So my understanding is that we can approach central government to provide a council tax increase above the statutory limit without going for a referendum. We talk about using every lever in the book. Have we had those discussions with government about the potential for an increase above that? My understanding is a number of local authorities have had discussions. Hampshire were unsuccessful. They wanted, I think, a 15% increase, which is perhaps a little eye-watering. My understanding is other local authorities have had discussions and been successful. Or perhaps I'm misreading the minister's statement. I wonder if you could talk to that next.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lee. The short answer that I'm going to give you is no, we haven't spoken to government in relation to this. I know that Mrs Radford would want to give you a longer answer in relation to perhaps those other authorities and when we might consider taking that step.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there were a lot of councils that tried to get increases in their council tax last year. The government changed their approach this time round, and those councils that did apply, they looked at where your level of council tax was in relation to other authorities. So the ones that they actually granted were the ones that were lower, because they didn't want to or have councils that are already quite high council tax even higher. So that's why they rejected quite a lot of them that had previously had increases. No, we haven't had any of those conversations yet. What we wanted to do was get through this budget process, have a clearer idea where we are, and we wanted to go through the steps that we are currently going through, and depending on how that proceeds throughout this financial year, later on in the year, probably maybe early autumn time, might be the time, once we've done our sort of first set of projections, might be the time that we start engaging the government. But there's a number of avenues we can follow before we even start talking to them. So we've got a few councils to learn from as well. So it's definitely on our radar to start involving the government should we need to this financial year coming.
Can I just ask a question, Ms Radford, while you're still there? At the beginning of your answer, you said some councils were already high, some were low. Where would Surrey Heath be on that? Are we high or low?
Surrey are generally quite high across the country. So the government looked much wider. They didn't just look at county levels. So yeah, I'd say there were some quite desperate authorities that didn't get the referendum limit lifted because of their levels.
Thank you. Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. So maybe I'll just mop up a couple of things, if that's okay, in one go. Well, there's a few I was going to mop up that have come up already, if that's all right, including something just related to that.
So if we go to mop up,
right. Yeah. So first of all, an interesting stat has come out recently as part of this LGR review work, which is that there's as many F&G properties in Elmbridge as there is in all of Birmingham, but they're quite, let's call them big houses, Chair. They're quite different in terms of scale of population and everything else, right? Also, we can argue whether it's going to be 2 unitaries, 3 unitaries, 27 unitaries, but let's assume for a second it might be 3. Those would end up being the most wealthy unitaries in the country compared to the existing ones. So that gives you an idea of where our council tax is and where our council, the properties. I want to go back to Councillor Rowland's point around the staff and the pay increase and the morale. I think it's something we're all very cognizant of. It's not ideal in any way whatsoever. We need to try and work our way through these changes and then see what we can manage next year. It's maybe worth just reminding members that I think it's new staff and newly promoted staff, I think, have 3 years of increment. Maybe the Chief Exec could confirm that. Now, it would be a fairly small percentage of the population, but there are some staff that will be getting increments related to that, which is maybe different to other sectors. So we'll certainly see what we can do in future years. In terms of the, in simple terms, what we need to try and do is with the statutory services, we need to try and see, can we do them smarter? Can we do them in a different way? And I have to say immense credit to all of the officers involved to date in coming up with innovations in that regard. We're far from finished the detailed planning, but a lot of thought is being given into how can we do it in a different way without changing the net outcome for the residents as much as possible. So I think it's important that we do note formally Mr. Stevens' leadership in this, and thank you, Councillor Lee, for noting that already. Obviously, Ms. Bainbridge is doing all the pulling of strings in the background as leading the programme. It's much appreciated, and I think other members of the CMT have really bought into it, including Ms. McCubbins, who's in front of me here, on the discretionary services. So immense credit to everybody involved in looking beyond some of the existing challenges and some of the things that might be a blocker to change, like, for example, the pay increase, let's be honest, but thinking through what can we do to protect the services for the residents. So when it comes to the statutory side, it's about how can we do it smarter, keep basically within a good service level around the statute. I don't want to say the same service level, but a good service level in line with national or appropriate benchmarks, but can we do it in a lower cost way? When it comes to the discretionary services, it's the same effectively, but also we need to make sure that the user pays for that service if we're going to continue with doing it. So it's a combination of both. Can we do it smarter? And can the user pay for that service? So on balance, then, it's still worthwhile doing. As Mr. Stevens mentioned, there are some services that we have to question, do we do them at all? And I'll give a very simple example, Heathscene. Heathscene is a very useful communication medium. It goes through every door in the borough. It helps inform them as to what we're doing, what some of the themes of the day are. We've done, as people remember, centre spreads on community safety topics of domestic abuse and antisocial behaviour, trying to inform our residents and making sure they have access to good information. But it's not something we have to do, and it costs us about $20,000 a year. So it is something that we won't be doing going forward because we can't afford to do that anymore. We can afford to do digital stuff, and so hence we'd encourage everybody to engage with our digital platforms, but we can't afford to be sending things out through the post. So that's the sort of way that we need to work through things. It was touched on in Kel's presentation earlier, or discussion topic earlier, around the land and property. We do have assets that have the potential to be sold that might be beneficial for the council because of the current interest rates and their income and their future liabilities. We just need to work through those case by case. There may be opportunities for residents to extend their gardens into areas of landlocked strips, ransom strips that we have, in which case, why would we not try and create value for the residents and ourselves? And there may be other surplus assets because the world has changed. Pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's not the same, and some assets are underutilised. We are also not necessarily the natural owner of those assets. We have buildings on extremely long leases that are used primarily by one organisation. If that organisation wishes to take that asset on, it remains in the community. We can obviously work with them in terms of the right structure, but they might be the more natural owner of that asset because all we're doing is providing the freehold effectively. So there is no one magic bullet here. It's a combination of all of the above, but it requires us to pick up every stone and look underneath it and say, what if? And then if we think there's something there, that we give it a try. And I think going back to Councillor Wilson's point, we might get more out of some things than we expect and less out the others. And it isn't about individual work streams and it isn't about individual initiatives. It's about the totality to try and make sure that we protect the services for the most needy in our community, which I know is very much the focus of all of the members here today and the officers as well.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Turning to page 55, it talks about turnover. I'm assuming this is monthly churn of staff, is what it's referring to. Do we know what the annual churn is at the moment? It references, I think, something around 20%. Is that where annual churn's landing at the moment?
So we anticipated or estimated an approximate churn of 20%. It's fair to say that actually in light of external factors, such as local government reorganisation, actually that figure seems to be lower than it previously was. So when we first profiled this, it was late last year. It was before the white paper was released, before local government reorganisation was even suggested as a term. So we believe that the figure is closer to 16% than 20%.
Okay. Given the complexities of what's going on, that's probably a little bit of an endorsement of your leadership.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't say that, Councillor Lee. I think it's more a case of people waiting to see what happens next with reorganisation.
The next one I wanted to touch on was car parks. I think car parks is mentioned 3 times in this particular agenda, twice under one item. Are we looking at selling off all the car parks? Because, of course, it's a non-statutory service. And I think if there are people out there that believe they can run our car parks more efficiently and provide free parking, I just wondered, have we looked at exiting all of them to a car parking provider? And what sort of money would we be raising? Because obviously they're not properly washing their face at the moment, so that could potentially arrest some losses.
Thank you, Chair. Good question, Councillor Lee. No, we're not looking at all car parks. Generally, the car parks we're looking at are ones that are either considered not to be beneficial for the council to continue maintaining and managing, or they're underutilised. So it's certainly not every single car park within the council's estate. It is a limited few.
Why not all car parks? It's a non-statutory service, and obviously they're assets that are of value that can pay down debt.
That's a fair point, Councillor Lee. It's not one we've considered so far, but given your comment, we'll take that away and look at it.
I think perhaps, Chair, it may feed into the work programme where we're reviewing car parks to look at all options, leaving no stone unturned. The final question was around the theatre building. I appreciate it's kind of potentially crossing boundaries and streams, but it is around cost. Are we doing a full cost benefit analysis on the exit of the property? Because obviously if it's washing its face and driving profitable revenue, then we may not want to exit it. Whereas if it is not fully washing its face, i.e. with its pay down of interest, etc., it may be in our interest to exit it.
That's right, that's the analysis that we need to do.
So it's not been done yet, is what you're saying?
It's not been completed and reported back to the working group now.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you.
I almost thought that we were going to go into part 2 then. Can I just, I'm going to give you your question, but I've got one other question down here, and I'm going to just ask it quickly while I've got it. And I did write the page down for this one. Page 50, 1.2. Yeah, so it mentions mitigated risks and the risk register, and it mentions amber and red. Are there many items that are on the amber and red list at the moment?
I'm happy to pass this one to Mr. Bainbridge, who will have far greater immediate and first-hand knowledge than I will.
So the initial assessment, there are some items that are amber and red, which I suppose reflects the importance of the programme and some of the risks around resourcing and that kind of thing. But what we now need to do is obviously go through all the mitigations and then see what the residual risks are. So we've had an initial discussion with the officer risk group, and then we'll be looking at those. So that's something we're going to be keeping under sort of review on a sort of monthly basis.
Will they appear on, if they're amber and red, will they appear on the main risk register?
We did discuss the transformation. I mean, there are, in the corporate risk register, there are some risks already relating to the transformation programme. So we are having discussions about, what needed to be appended to the corporate risk one, but we're going to be working with Mrs. Radford and also Mr. Turnbull as well on that.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be quick. It's just two probably questions that could be answered really quickly. Given that the objective is to try and get to local government reorganisation without going into section 114. Have any consideration been given to sale and lease back of assets? Because that would provide enough capital to get to the finishing line. And the other one is just quickly on the shared services work stream. I don't think it says that it would just be shared services with other districts and boroughs. Has any consideration been given to sharing services with parish councils as well? One example popped into my head was Windlesham Parish Council's got over £1 million in cash and getting very little interest from it, but this council's got an excellent treasury function. Would it be possible to use that to their advantage as well? I know Surrey County Council conducts the treasury function for Surrey Police because they've got large reserves as well. Sorry, two completely separate questions there, but hopefully not too long. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Wilson, that took me a long time to process. I do apologise. In relation to assets and lease back, any realistic option that comes forward we are considering. I know that Mr. Breeden is speaking to a variety of different organisations in relation to all of our assets that are either currently on the market or we're contemplating marketing at some point in the future. So nothing is off the table, I think would be my short answer to that. We're open to consider any option which gives us a capital receipt, which assists us with our budget challenges. In relation to selling of services, we already work with the Windlesham Parish Council in terms of the ground maintenance, so we work in partnership with them there. We're most certainly open for business. We're looking for any shared arrangement which helps with our sustainability and actually generates a resilience within the service too. We did have quite an extensive number of conversations with adjacent districts and boroughs around shared services, but as soon as local government reorganisation became a theme, they fell away. Once we understand who our natural partners are moving forward, I'm certain those conversations will start to recommence and we can start to talk about shared arrangements across the geographic footprint.
Okay, so assuming we've got no more questions on this part of the agenda, we need to go into part 2. Well, Councillor Wilson definitely did. Yeah, so we have to go in for that. Okay, so I've got to read this thing, haven't I? Can't actually ever remember reading before. The committee had advised to resolve that under section 100 2A4 of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as set out below. Do I need to read that a bit as well?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Part 7, 3. Information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding the information. Let's pause for a bit. Oh.
We are, and that's the point of the comment. I'd like to applaud you as chair and obviously officers for keeping the maximum amount of this item in the public domain. It's very, very welcome, and it's the right way to do democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, sorry, I didn't realise. I've got to get you to agree to go in.